Boa tarde. Neste momento vamos dar início então à moderação do simpósio patrocinado aqui na sala 1, com o apoio da Cardinal. Vamos convidar a partir de agora então o Sr. Ben Davis, ele é CEO do JETSA, uma empresa internacional. Sou Cláudia Matsuba, sou enfermeira, especialista, e o tema que ele vai trazer hoje é um tema bastante importante que remete a erros de conexão, né, da linha de acesso enteral. Ele vai falar agora sobre Improving Patient Safety through Safer Tubing Connectors. Ok? Então, no final, né, dessa apresentação, nós vamos ter o apoio da doutora Juliana para fazer então o translate desse conteúdo. Ok?
Thank you. So yeah, I am Ben Davis. I'm the Executive Director of GEDSA. I've been the Executive Director for 2 years, but I've been a part of GEDSA since 2012, serving on various committees, and I was on the Board of Directors. Prior to being the Executive Director of GEDSA, I was on the manufacturing side of this. I was a member. I was the Vice President of Engineering and Product Development for Neomed, which is now part of the Avanos family, so you may be familiar with some of those products. So I've designed that portfolio of products, so I know quite a bit about infit, especially from the technical and engineering side. And I'm also an industrial engineer from Georgia Tech. Before I get into the real heart of the presentation here, I did want to give just a brief overview of what GEDSA is, the organization that I run. GEDSA stands for the Global Enteral Device Supplier Association, and our mission is to promote patient safety worldwide through safer ISO-compliant tubing connectors. We are a 501c6 federal tax exempt nonprofit trade association, so we're made up of manufacturers that actually manufacture the product. We are really the sort of educational and awareness arm of all the manufacturers where they're able to come together through us. We have about 45 manufacturers as part of the organization, and we also work with about 30 supporting organizations, including BRASPEN. So for the agenda, our main goal today is going to be to raise awareness of tubing misconnections in the Enteral infit ISO 80369-3 Patient Safety Initiative. We're going to do that we're going to break that into 4 modules. So in the first module, we'll define what a tubing misconnection is. Then we'll go into the impact of tubing misconnections. And then module 3 will cover ways to reduce misconnections by using infit. And in that module, we'll also do a device overview to kind of show you the products that are impacted here. And then our last module will be going through the conversion planning and resources that are available to you to help plan your conversion. So with that, let's get started. So module 1, what is a tubing misconnection? And I really like the FDA's definition of a misconnection. Is very succinct. Misconnection: inappropriate connections occurring between 2 connectors that attach devices with different intended uses or applications, such as enteral feeding systems and non-enteral systems. And it should be noted that tubing misconnections can lead to serious injury or death. I like to show this picture. This pointer will reach, I guess it won't. Not from here. This picture, this is a little neonate. So imagine just how tiny this little hand is. In this very tiny space, there are 4 different applications, 4 different tubing types or therapies going on here, but they all have the same lure connectors. So this is, I think, a good way just to show you sort of all in one picture the opportunity for misconnections to occur, because any of these things could be disconnected and inadvertently misconnected with another line because they all share a common connector. And to give you just a few more examples of tubing misconnections, these are just a few examples that were from the FDA's website. These are all based on actual cases that have happened. If you go to their website, which is linked here, there are many, many more that they also share, but I just like to go through a few of them to kind of give you an idea more of misconnections in general. First, we have an epidural infusion set connected to a peripheral IV. This delivered epidural medication to the bloodstream. This resulted in the patient's death. In another case, we had a feeding tube connected to an inline ventilator suction catheter. This delivers feeding contents into the patient's lungs, also resulting in the patient's death. In another case, we had a heparin lock, a peripheral IV route, connected to an automatic blood pressure cuff. In this case, air was delivered to the bloodstream and caused the patient's death. And then our final one here is where a feeding tube was coupled with a peripheral line of a pregnant woman. In this case, enteral nutrition was delivered directly into the bloodstream, and neither the 35-week-old fetus or the woman survived. So now we've defined a misconnection, and we've given a couple of examples of a misconnection. But let's discuss how common are misconnections. So how big of a problem actually is this? In 2010, a literature review was performed by Simmons et al., and it's linked here, it's actually published in Aspen, where they found 116 cases of internal tubing misconnections in the literature. Of these, 21 patients died. So 95% or 95 of the patients survived, which is great, but of those, 84 of them had pretty severe complications. So unfortunately, these almost always end in a fairly catastrophic or really impactful complication from a misconnection. It's usually, rarely is it not a sort of problematic or big issue. But that's just what's reported in the literature, and I think it's pretty widely known or accepted that what's reported in the literature does not reflect what's the actual number of events that occur in the real world. Events often go underreported, misreported, miscategorized. For instance, maybe something that was actually a misconnection is sort of filed away as a medication administration error, because ultimately that's what maybe impacted the patient. The wrong thing got delivered to them. However, it was a misconnection that led to that. But a lot of times that's just not captured in the way these things are documented. So in an effort to try to ascertain the actual occurrence rate of tubing misconnections, the FDA and Aspen put out this survey in 2006. And what they found in the survey, which was almost 200 clinicians, is that 15.9% of them had experienced a tubing misconnection in their facility. That to me is a very high number. It's unacceptably high. But if you think of it in terms of number of hospitals, so for instance, let's just extrapolate that across the 7,250 hospitals in the United States. If you applied that to 15.9% of them, that means that 1,150 hospitals would have had a tubing misconnection. So I think in that perspective, it really maybe helps bring home the point that this is fairly widespread, or much more widespread than it should be. So now we've defined the tubing misconnection and given you some examples and some numbers. Let's talk about how do they actually happen? Well, it could be due to a multitude of factors. You have low lighting situations, it could be where there's multiple devices and line types, time pressures, human error, a lack of tactile feedback, unintended use of tubes, or what's also called off-label use. And then you also have patient portability. So this would be like where a patient has a one-tube type placed at their hospital, and maybe they're traveling and have to be admitted to another facility, and that facility is using a different tube type. And so then to make connections, they have to do workarounds, and anytime you do workarounds, that you're opening, exposing yourself to a risk of a misconnection. And that's very similar to this nursing turnover point too. At least in the US, since COVID, we've seen a 300% increase in the number of traveling nurses. And this is a similar problem to the patient portability, where if a nurse is experiencing in one hospital that uses one tubing type, one connector, they've now moved on to another facility that uses a completely different set of connectors. There is a learning curve there. And oftentimes, in order just to make the connection and make things happen, workarounds occur, and there's where the risks also go way up when you start doing those workarounds. But what's the central theme of all of this, or what, if you will, what is the root cause of misconnections? And it really boils down to the compatibility of the connectors. So as long as you have a mechanical compatibility among connectors that should not connect, then you have the risk of a misconnection occurring. Why did we end up with all this compatibility where there should be no compatibility? Well, really a lot of it stemmed from the success of the lure connector. And so if you're not familiar, the lure connector is what's used in IV applications. It's dedicated now, today, to just IV applications. It should be. And this is not an attack against lure. The lure connector is a very good connector, and that's why it became so widely used. At one point or another, it's probably been used in just about every imaginable medical application where tubing and syringes was needed. So, and really when we talk about new systems and this infit, and this is truly a paradigm shift because, as you can see on the slide, the lure was invented in 1896. And this is the patent, where it was issued in 1897. So that's over 125 years ago. So we've not had a dedicated, standardized connector other than the lure for over 125 years. So this is a big deal. This is truly the definition of a paradigm shift when we talk about making this change. Okay, and that gets us through the first module. So if you would, the key takeaways here I want you to please remember is that tubing connections can lead to severe consequences, including patient death and serious injury. Tubing misconnections are relatively common, with cases reported in the literature, but the true occurrence rate is likely much higher since events go unreported or miscategorized when they are reported. And the universality use of lure and other connectors have contributed to the risk of tubing misconnections. Now we'll get into module 2. This is the impact of misconnections. So I'm going to share this video in the way there's some technical issues, so I have to exit the presentation to get the video to play, just the way the internet's working here. But just a bit of a warning, this is a bit of an emotional video. Everything up to this point we've been talking about is really kind of abstract. It's numbers, it's data, it's cases. It's almost like theory, but I like to share this video because it brings home that this really is, these are loved ones that have been lost. These are real people that this has impacted. This is not some abstract thing that does not impact people.
I didn't get to say goodbye. And she said, "Oh, honey, I'll see you tomorrow." I said, "I know, Mom, but I just want you to know I love you." She said, "I love you too."
It's so important that we take the time to make these changes.
Yes, this is a big deal. It's huge. It is huge to change all the tubings in all hospitals. There's a reason for it. This can't happen.
My name is Trisha Asta. I've been a registered nurse for 32 years, mostly in the areas of critical care. Of course, always focusing on quality care in a very safe environment. On June 5th of 2012, my mom went into an outpatient surgery center to have carpal tunnel surgery done. My mother had the procedure done under a local, no general anesthetic. Came into the recovery room. The nurse took the line from the blood pressure monitor, and instead of inserting it into the cuff, she inserted it into a port of my mother's IV. This particular blood pressure machine, when you hit the button, would attempt 3 times to get a blood pressure reading before it would give up. So the large amount of air that would have entered into the cup to create a reading went into my mother's bloodstream 3 times. That explains why she was gone within a minute of arrival, because she just died from a very massive air embolus, and that explained her terrible presentation in the emergency room.
My name is Joanna Back, and our daughter was on the receiving end of a tubing misconnection in 2006. She was born at 30 weeks. She has Down syndrome and duodenal atresia, so she already had some issues. Plus, she needed to have open heart surgery. She was in the NICU for a while. While in the NICU, a nurse attached her G-tube line to her IV line. When the nurse realized her mistake, she yanked out all of the tubing. And I'll never forget how she looked that day. They didn't think she was gonna make it. They finally got some lines in, and they just did all they could do to support her. It took 3 days on life support, but she did make it through. We were very lucky that she did make it through, because most people don't make it when this happens to them.
My name's Glenda Rogers. I've been an OB nurse for 26 years. My daughter Robin was 35 weeks pregnant when she was admitted to the hospital with nausea, vomiting, dehydration, and pain. The doctors caring for her had decided that she needed to be transferred to a higher level of care. But before they would transfer her, they wanted to check on the baby. They did the ultrasounds and checked, and there was no heartbeat, and we had to tell Robin that the baby had died. Before the transfer was completed, Robin also died. On her IV pole, there was a bag of, the best way I can describe it is it looked like a melted chocolate milkshake. A big bag, like 2,000 liters. And on every corner of that bag, it had none for IV use. And it was hooked to her PICC line. The tubing was compatible with the PICC line, so there was no trouble hooking it up. She started it at 11 o'clock to run at 200 an hour. It wasn't discovered until 5 o'clock at night.
So clearly we have a serious problem, and one that's truly impactful. So how do we solve it? Well, years ago, at least a decade, maybe closer to 15 years ago, ISO convened a group of technical experts, clinical experts, regulatory standards experts to create the ISO 80369 series of small bore connector standards. If you're not familiar with ISO, ISO is the International Organization for Standardization. Like I said, they put together the standard, started, I would say at least actually 15 years ago. In this effort, within this series, this ISO series of connectors, the design of the connectors is that they are mechanically engineered to be incompatible with the other areas of therapy. The interval section, which is what we're discussing today, is ISO 80369-3, which is more commonly known as INFIT. Then I'd like to share this image just to briefly kind of cover and illustrate that this is not just interval. So this is the entire spectrum of small bore tubing connectors. So of course we have interval over here on the right, the -3, but then we also have respiratory connectors, that's the -2. We have -6, which is neuraxial and epidural applications. This is also called NRFit. Then you have vascular IV, which is -7. Limb cuff inflation, which is blood pressure, is -5. And then there's also a urinary collection, which is -4. And just briefly, going back to the lure, the -7 is actually the lure connector standard that's part of this larger standard now. So if you think you're not using ISO 80369 connectors, if you're using IV syringes, they most definitely are probably lure, so you're probably already using a connector that's within this ISO series. And then just to give you some timelines on these are all actually published, except for the urological -4. These are all published back in 2016. Some just general requirements that are applicable to all these is that they must not be connectable with the other connectors in the series. They also must be rigid or semi-rigid. We'll discuss this a little bit later, but some of these legacy style funnel, female oriented connectors that are real flexible, they inherently have misconnection risk because they will flex around things they're not meant to and make a seal. These connectors must also pass misconnection risk assessment and usability and human factors testing. And these must also not be connectable with lure or needleless connector ports. So our key takeaways for this module are that misconnections have significant impact on patient safety, and it can occur due to various factors, but the root cause is mechanical compatibility of connectors. ISO design standards have been developed for system-specific applications, ensuring that connectors are not connectable with others in the series and not connectable with lure or needleless connector ports. And these ISO standards implement a incompatibility by design connector features to prevent misconnections and improve patient safety globally. Yeah, I should say that again, globally. So this is not just for Brazil, this is not just US, this is a global standard. So module 3, now that we've given you a brief overview of the entire ISO series, we'll now dive into the interval specific series to give you a little bit more information. And then we'll also go into the components of the interval feeding system, because just in case you're not familiar with those components and what they're called, we'll go through that, and then also you'll be able to see sort of a crosswalk between the previous version of the legacy product and then what the infit equivalent is. So the interval specific standard, ISO 80369-3 infit. I like to share this drawing because this is, I don't think a lot of clinicians get to see the drawing straight out of the ISO standard. So this is the specification, and this is just one connector. So this is the male connector. The female connector has the same sort of level of detail in its connector. But I share this because too, I like to show that this is very dimensioned. It's not haphazardly designed. This thing has a ton of, just a load of dimensions. And not only are there lots of dimensions that you have to meet, and this is all to satisfy that it will not misconnect with something else. So if you get dimension out of specification, then you know that's where dimensionally you start having the opportunity for a misconnection. So this thing has to be very tightly dimensioned. In addition to that, it's also extremely tightly toleranced as well. So these, someone who was a manufacturer of syringes, I can tell you, and feeding tubes, I can tell you this is a difficult connector to get right. You have to do a lot of tooling debug to actually run these, but it's a very good connector. These connectors have been assessed for misconnections and verified and validated to an extent that surpasses the rigorous scrutiny of the FDA and other regulatory agencies throughout the world. It should also be noted these have been on the market in the US and Europe since 2016. And Europe is basically 100% converted. I don't know that you can ever say 100% because there may be one hospital out there that's not, and therefore it's not 100, but I guess you could say effectively 100%. And they've actually been so since roughly 2019 or so. So they've actually been fully converted for quite a while. And also since launch, these safer infit connectors have not had a single reported misconnection that was actually attributed to the infit connector. All right, so now we'll go through the components of the interval feeding system just to familiarize you with the different parts, and then two, I kind of show you how these are going from the legacy style over to infit. Within the interval feeding system, we have four sort of major components. You have administration sets, syringes, feeding tubes, and then you have pharmacy and accessory items. So administration sets, we'll dive into this one now. The types of administration sets you have are what's called spike sets. You have bag pump sets. There are gravity feeding sets, extension sets, then you also have low profile extension sets, and you have other bolus devices as well. I share this image because I also want to point out this is a pump bag set, and the one on the left you can see has the white Christmas tree, or what's called a transition connector, attached to it. And the one on the right, I think I just said right, I meant left. The one on the right though does not have the transition connector, so it's been removed. And as you guys get your transitions sort of up and running, this transition connector is a piece that most often has to be used for some period of time during transition. So this is what it looks like in case you're not familiar, but for instance, if a patient has a legacy style G-tube placed, and they go back in the hospital and the hospital is using bag sets or other connectors to have infit, well, those would not connect anymore. But this transition connector allows you to make the connection, which is, of course, preferred over having to replace the G-tube to make it, switch it over to infit when it's not necessary or it hasn't, gone through its use duration yet. I also want to show these low profile extensions because there has been some confusion over what's changing with these. The white pieces on the left, these are called bayonet fittings or keys. Like this is the key from a MIC key. These are not changing, so no need to worry about that connector. It's the one on the right that attaches to a syringe or an extension set or bag set that's actually changing. So if you can see here, the two styles, the one on the far right is the legacy or funnel style female connector, and then the one on the left is the infit screw style connectors. The next component we have are enteral syringes. Historically, there have been all types of syringes that have been used enterally. You have syringes that are called enteral oral slip tip syringes. You also have what's called a catheter style tip syringe. Of course, Luer syringes at one point were widely used for enteral use. And there's also quite a few proprietary or manufacturer-specific designed syringes that are also out there. As far as proprietary goes, I do want to make another point. The oral or slip tip syringe, oral slip tip syringes, there's many that are similar, and they were used in the legacy world for quite a few years. But there's actually no standard around those. So they all have nuances and a little bit of differences. Some work better in combination with some feeding tubes, where others don't work very well with those feeding tubes, because there is no international standard on those connectors. So I just wanted to point that out in case you were unaware. Those are not standardized, and that creates a problem. Within infit too, I'd also like to just point out, you may have heard of infit low-dose tip syringes. In case you've heard of it or you're not familiar with what it looks like, that's the syringe here on the left. It has a nozzle going through it. This is usually in smaller syringes, so typically 6 ml and smaller, and it's there to improve dosing accuracy. And then you also have standard infit tip syringes. So this will be the syringe on the right, which is just doesn't have that nozzle. Our next component in the enteral system is our feeding tubes. Of course, feeding tubes have historically had funnel or female style connectors. Feeding tubes include gastrostomy tubes, low profile feeding tubes. You got nasogastric, nasojejunal, gastrojejunal, peg tubes. And this picture is basically a crosswalk. So the tubes on the top are basically the same manufacturer. The one on the left is the infit version, and then the one on the right you can see is female in orientation, sort of like a funnel, is the legacy version. And on the bottom, the same thing. This manufacturer's infit version is on the left. The corresponding female funnel version legacy product is on the right. And this is another example. These are G-tubes. The one on the left you can see has the funnel style connectors, and then the one on the right has the newer, safer infit style connectors. And then I wanted to show this because I talked about the white piece on the low profile extensions. Of course, that's what plugs into this low profile device. That piece is not changing, and neither is this device. So you don't have to worry about these, any change coming to these. They're not impacted in case you thought they might be. And then just to show how these come together, you can see that it is a screw connection. The syringe just twists into the connector of the feeding tube. These are both rigid connections. And here's how an infit syringe would connect to a low profile extension, which is then connected to a low profile device. And then our last component of the enteral system is our pharmacy and accessory items. These include things like bottle fill caps, medication bottle adapters, fill straws, syringe caps. There are tamper-evident caps as well. There's pre-filled syringes, and then amber medication syringes. I encourage you to go to this link. We have it's our pharmacy guide, where we've created a visual crosswalk that basically lays out all the legacy product and then shows you what the infant equivalent of that product is, because there has been some confusion in the market over how to access infant versions of these pharmacy accessories that pharmacy techs and pharmacists enjoy using because they make their life a lot easier when they're filling a bunch of syringes. So our key takeaways here are that ISO 80369-3, or infant, is the enteral specific ISO standardized connector. Infant was designed to minimize tubing misconnections and improve patient safety over legacy connectors. And, key integral infant components include administration sets, syringes, feeding tubes, and pharmacy accessories. And that gets us into our last module, which is planning your conversion and the resources that are available to you. Conversion planning is typically done in 3 steps. You have your awareness phase or step, which is really where stuff like this, where you're becoming familiar with what it is, what's basically coming down the road. Then you have your preparedness stage, which is where internally, usually within your facility, you're implementing educational programs around the change. And then you actually have your adoption phase, of course, where you actually make the transition coordinated throughout the hospital. We have a plethora of materials available on stayconnected.org. I could do probably 2 hours just covering just those materials. I could probably do more than that, but so I will not do that. I'll just direct you to please go to the website. We actually have a Portuguese section of the website, and we've recently updated all of our Portuguese translations, so hopefully you'll find that helpful. Another thing within a transition process that we've noticed over the years here is that a successful transition most always has a transition leader. So it really does take someone that's able to coordinate between all the different departments. They can talk with nursing, pharmacy, GI, their provider, supply chain, risk management, all the relevant departments that this change would impact. Once you have someone that's really able to take the reins and step up to lead it, that's when a successful transition usually happens, and one that has least amount of hiccups along the way. And speaking of transitions, I did want to share sort of our latest updates on where we are globally with the transition to infant. In the US, we are approximately 60% converted. Canada is approximately 45%. Europe, as I said earlier, we say nearly 100%. I mean, effectively it's 100%. Asia is getting underway. Australia and New Zealand's about 80%, and then we have Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa is around 30% adoption. In South America, we're hoping we'll start getting at least one, a handful, and hoping to add to that. So our key takeaways for Module 4 is that there are a multitude of infant resources available at stayconnected.org that can help with your conversion planning process. We have transition checklists there. We have frequently asked questions. We have videos. We have cleaning protocols, medication administration protocols. We have just a ton of resources, so I really would encourage you to go check those out. The other key takeaway is that the Infant Patient Safety Initiative is global, and it's underway throughout the world. Now, I'd just like to thank the members of GETSA. So you may work with some of these manufacturers, but these are the folks that allow us to be able to do presentations like this, and our supporting organizations that we also partner with to be able to do things like this. And then again, here's some additional resources. I put the top link in there because that's directly to the Portuguese page that we have. So, and you can also always email us at info@getsa.org. We're happy to help, and we do respond. So we look forward to hearing from some of you. Thank you.